Hey, since Measure 110 passed, Oregon has become the country's guinea pig, of course, for drug decriminalization. We're the only state in the nation still to have decriminalized. The rest of the country is watching this process unfold. A group of researchers gathered in Salem last month for a symposium on studies that have been done looking at Measure 110. The gathering and a lot of the research was led by an organization called RTI International. They're a nonprofit research firm often contracted by the federal government. They wanted to take a look at whether Measure 110 in its current form actually has moved the needle when it comes to things like fatal overdoses, drug treatment, and law enforcement response. So let's focus on two of the issues they looked at: deadly overdoses and crime. None of the research offered at the symposium found any correlation between the measure and overdose deaths, either positive or negative. Researchers say that other parts of the country got hit by synthetic opioids like fentanyl much earlier than the western United States did. Some had it as early as 2014. You can see on this graph how overdose deaths started climbing in the Northeast, that's in the red, and the Midwest in the yellow years ago. For the West and Oregon, dark blue and light blue, they didn't start to climb until COVID hit in 2020. By then, fentanyl was taking over the drug supply. That's demonstrated by the graph of synthetic opioid overdoses here. Drugs were not decriminalized in Oregon until 2021, when Measure 110 went into effect. If we compare Oregon to other states in the West, Oregon's opioid overdose deaths continued to climb into 2022, but so did Washington's, where the mortality rate was actually higher, and drug possession was a misdemeanor for them during that period. Drugs were briefly decriminalized in Washington state after a court decision in 2021, but lawmakers there quickly passed a bill to make them criminal again. The researchers say they think that the reason for this spike in overdoses is because of fentanyl itself, not because of Measure 110. And they think that if the West follows trends in other regions, overdose deaths should start to level off in the next few years. Next, several studies tried to determine if Measure 110 caused an uptick in crime. For the most part, the answer they found was no. Violent crime in particular did not have any correlation with Measure 110. But when it comes to property crime, the results were kind of a mixed bag. The researchers used arrests as their metric. They say all kinds of arrests dropped in Oregon during the pandemic. They started to rise again, but they're not anywhere near where they were even pre-pandemic. But Portland did see a big spike in property crime calls, things like vandalism and theft immediately after Measure 110. Those started to drop back down in 2023. Finally, a few surveys looked at the interactions between drug users and police. We've talked previously about a PSU study that looked at police attitudes on Measure 110 and heard from police officers themselves. They overwhelmingly feel that it's way too lenient and it took away a lot of their tools to investigate other crimes. And they feel that the Class E citation that's currently there that they can give for drug possession, that it's basically useless. But a survey of drug users found that in spite of Measure 110, 73% still have some recent or ongoing involvement with the legal system, either through police stops, jail time, or something like probation. More than half said they had been stopped and searched, and almost half said that police had seized drugs from them. Now, many users said that they were totally unfamiliar with the Class E citations that Measure 110 allows for, and users tended to report that interactions with police were inconsistent and unpredictable. Either they reported being completely ignored by police, even while using drugs in public, or they'd be searched and have their drugs confiscated. The overwhelming sense from these studies is that decriminalization has not really moved the needle at all, for better or worse, beyond further reductions in arrests for drug possession, which were declining even before the measure passed. If there's one bright spot for several studies noted, it's that racial disparities in stops and arrests seem to have dropped at least somewhat. A study from NYU noted that racial disparities in arrests decreased in Oregon, but remain extremely high. Arrests for possession among black people fell more than their white counterparts, but black people remain more than 2 times more likely to be arrested. Native American Pacific Islanders were arrested at nearly 4 times the rate of whites.